Paulie gets some of his best storylines in season 6. By this time, Tony Sirico's acting skills reached their zenith and much is explored with the character, far from the days of him being more or less a comic relief in season 1. The thing with his mum, whatever happened there, Paulie versus Bobby in the ride, and the Colombian drug money beef are some of his major storylines of the season. His biggest of season 6 though is the episode Remember When. He and Tony travel to Miami to lie low when the FBI investigate Tony's first hit, Willie Overall. During the trip, Paulie shares stories about Tony's dad, reminiscing about the old days, making Tony laugh, but he also gets close to divulging sensitive information about the likes of Big Puss, even having random conversations with civilians, frustrating Tony who reprimands him about talking too much. The stories about the old days and Paulie exposing too much starts to get to Tony, leading him to say,
"Remember when is the lowest form of conversation."
And he walks away from the table. The whole episode is full of awkward tension as Tony gets more and more annoyed with Paulie, but at the same time, he's impressed with Paulie's fearlessness in dealing with Ramon and 3 other guys. Tony brings his concern to Beansy, who dismisses it, saying Paulie's always been a talker, and the fact that he's alone means that Tony Soprano and the crew is all Paulie really has.
All I know is Paulie got the area as a stand-up guy.
Tony questions whether he's ever really been put to the test, but the scene ends with him re-emphasizing his love for Paulie. Later we learn the Willie Overall hit is blamed on Jackie Aprile. Tony looks slightly disgusted at Paulie gleefully cackling away at a TV, and it all leads to a celebratory fishing trip that Tony takes Paulie on. I wonder if Tony even subconsciously realized that partly why he contemplated whacking Paulie boiled down to him simply finding him annoying. He's irritated by the man, has spent a holiday with him, and it's been so grating he wants to stab him with a Rambo knife. What tipped him over the edge anyway? Paulie innocently laughing at a TV show? But instead of admitting that to himself, it's far easier to internalize that he had to kill Paulie because Paulie admitted he betrayed the family, when the real reason might simply be he's just an irritating old man now. When he talks with Beansy, Tony says Paulie used to be like Gary Cooper, and this of course is a reference to Tony's Gary Cooper rant about the strong silent type when men want always whining and whinging. It's all related to one of the entire points of the show, that things were better in the old days, that Tony had come in at the end of the thing, that the best is over, as he says in the pilot, the death of the American dream, which you could argue is the entire ethos of the show. He has a nostalgia for the old days, the Gary Cooper days, but time and again it's brought to his attention that things weren't all that great in the old days, like in the episode where he spends time with Fran and realizes that his dad was not a great guy, even though he spent so much time trying to blame his mother for all the faults that happened between the two parents. Or the fact that all these old legends like Feech and Richie come out of the can, and in the modern day, face to face, even though he would have loved them when he was a kid, he now finds them a nuisance. Paulie is part of this. He's a relic, a dinosaur from the old days, a reminder for Tony that maybe Gary Cooper wasn't so strong, wasn't so silent. The episode starts with him fondly remembering that his dad would send him to Uncle Paulie if he was bad. But he's realized somewhere in Miami that his rose-tinted view of the old world has been shattered by Paulie. He doesn't like that, and he'd rather Paulie wasn't here anymore to remind him. Once upon a time he saw Paulie as the ideal gangster. He looked up to him growing up. Now he realizes he's just kind of a lonely loser who never grew up. As this season goes on, Tony allegorically cuts more and more ties with his father, essentially rebelling, like the whole gambling thing and ruining his relationship with Hesh, as we discussed in my video on Tony and Hesh. He also cuts ties with Junior, another father figure, and I wonder if on a subconscious level, what with all the talk of Johnny Boy, the murder of Willie Overall, which still affects Tony as we see, makes him resent the likes of Paulie, who represents his father, as Paulie was literally the one egging Tony on to pull the trigger. He resents them for bringing him into this life and not giving him a chance at a normal life. In any case, Tony's disappointment with Paulie is perfectly juxtaposed with the storyline in the home with Junior and the Asian guy, all which happens in the same episode as the Tony and Paulie stuff. Carter Chong, the Asian dude, also looks up to Junior as a mentor and role model, but ends up disheartened when Junior becomes weak, pisses himself, and decides to give up and take the medication from the staff. Chong stays in his bed, disenfranchised from Junior. Chong even attacks Junior at one point. Chong is essentially Tony, and Junior is Paulie. a point driven home when Junior even calls Chong Anthony at one point.
You're very smart, Anthony.
I would argue that there's other aspects of Paulie that Tony also resents, in that it might come as a surprise, and this might actually be an unpopular opinion, but he might actually be jealous of him. It's like the scene where Tony is told he's in the clear about Willie Overall. He isn't even pleased. He just says he wonders what the next thing is going to be, unable to enjoy the moment. Meanwhile, even though he hasn't been told and he's got a murder charge hanging over his head, Paulie is in the next room laughing his ass off, completely carefree, able to immerse himself into a TV show, enjoying the little moments, to paraphrase a line from Tony himself in Season 1. It's a mentality that Season 6 Tony can't fathom, because in this moment, Paulie is the happy wanderer that Tony despises so much. And then you factor in other things like the painting that Paulie had of him as a general, something Tony brings up in this episode. He hated it, as it forced him to reflect on what he was for his crew, a leader who must make tough decisions. Paulie is also a simpleton, bringing up how young Tony was for his first hit, cheerily talking about it, and it doesn't go well with Tony. There's all sorts of inner conflict going on with Tony about this thing of ours, but Paulie represents an utter lack of critical thinking about the morality of what they do. So all in all, yes, there's the fat joke and the idea that Paulie talks too much, but there's so much more going on. And one of the main takeaways from this episode is Tony's underlying resentment towards his father for trapping him into a life of this thing of ours. The whole reason why they're even in Miami is because Johnny Boy made him commit murder, taking away his innocence. So it's no wonder when Paulie starts talking blissfully about the old days, Tony becomes irritated as it's bringing up a lot of repressed feelings.